Welcome back. I am Rudy Knapp. This is Legacy Build Your Kingdom. I am back with another podcast on relationships. We started this series last week where we talked a little bit about endless effort. So I believe in all relationships, endless effort is needed from both parts. It is the foundation for all of relationships. If both sides are giving endless effort, and you are in a relationship in which both understand that the person that they love, the person they're with, comes before their own self. That is a concept in which I think people have to understand there is not enough. You don't just give enough. You give endless effort. So, we talked a little bit about that as the first part in this series. We're going to get into the second part in this series here in a second and talk a little bit about communication. Most people will always tell you that communication is the key to all relationships. And we're going to talk a little bit about how I don't think that communication is the exact key to relationships. I'm going to get into why I think that, but then we're going to also talk a little bit more about how that leads into what you can do when communicating with your partner and how that is a key component to relationships. So, before we do any of that, I would hope that you guys can, if you're listening to this and you enjoy this and you're getting something from this, somebody asked me recently, like, why do you do your podcast? I go back to day one of when I started this, my first podcast, well over a year ago now, a year and a couple months now. And one thing that's very unique for me is that I started this entire podcast because I felt I had to get outside my comfort zone and I wanted to relate to my kids. I think I talk about how, I ended coaching football with my son and how that was really devastating to me. And this idea of getting into how I wanted to relate to him. I wanted to give back to him. We always had these great conversations. My daughter, too, we'd have these very big conversations in our car rides. It was really difficult for me to lose that. I still have it. I still have my kids. We still have conversations. But when you talk about coaching a sport and you're giving life lessons to your son through that sport, or even helping your daughter with life lessons through some of the things she goes through, sometimes you lose a little bit of that when you don't have that common ground to relate, like sports. So I still have those conversations. My kids hate listening to me talk. I'm sure there's a lot of people been in relationships. We'll get to talking about relationships where people don't like hearing me speak, I guess. I believe that I communicate pretty well and I believe that I am direct. And sometimes we'll talk a little bit about communication here and how being direct, might be a fault of mine where I believe you should be direct, but I also believe that you should have to be conscious of your tone. You have to be conscious of how you deliver. And those are things that are coming more apparent to me as I grow. I've been hearing them from people. I've listened to that. I've always fought against that in their perspective because I always believed I should be myself when I'm communicating. When I say direct, don't get that wrong. I believe that is about me expressing who I am and what I feel. I'm passionate, so I speak passionately, but I also feel like I know in the moment where I'm now understanding as I'm growing that that can be a fault in communicating. So we can get into all of that. But again, I started this whole podcast for my own kids. I want them to have my words someday, and one day they will. And right now, they're still at that point, I believe, I don't know, that they don't want to hear, my podcast. They don't want to hear me at this point. They listen to me. They're respectful kids. But to go on and have these conversations about life, I want them to have them if they ever want them in their life. So I created this not looking for money and looking for this public gain. I've been accused of my ego, or I've been accused of the concept of you want attention. It is mind blowing if you knew who I was as a person. I'm probably the most humble that will come, but I am also confident in who I am. So I think that's what you have to do when you're building a kingdom for yourself. But I will say that it's interesting as this podcast has gone on, and I've been very consistent because one of the things I'll preach about is consistency. I've been consistent in doing this podcast week in and week out. I took a couple months off there. I think 2 months off there where I was having some technical difficulties, but I jumped right back into it. So we're here. But it's funny because as the podcast starts um, continuing on, I've gotten some awards throughout what I do mine through Spotify. And through Spotify, one of the things that they talk about is comparing to other podcasts. And it's really interesting to see some awards where it says something like, out of all new podcasts in the last year, I am 86% more productive in it, and people listen to me more than any other podcast. So, there's different awards and things that have come out that they've shared. And I thought that's pretty awesome. Just for my own self, that's pretty awesome that people are actually listening. So I want to say thank you to all you that listen, that tune in. I know my family does sometimes. I know my cousins might do it. I know some of my friends do. I really appreciate that. The people that I really care about deeply, they give me the little bit of the feedback. I'm always open to a different perspective. If they disagree with something, I'm always open to understanding that they agree with something, they like something, or something that they can add to this. I've taken some suggestions from people. So again, I want to say thank you. And if you haven't hit like and share, and those kind of things, or you're not following, please do so. It does add to some of those things. And it is pretty cool when you see that. They actually offered me to be able to make some money off of this. There's different ways to do it. I'm not going to make anyone pay to listen to me, but I will say that it's pretty cool to think that some people actually want to hear some of this and actually listen to my perspective, which leads me right back into communication, because I'm here and I'm communicating with all of you, my own vulnerable aspects on life. And one thing that you have to have in a relationship is vulnerability. And it's very difficult. And as a man, that's one of the most difficult things that you can do, being vulnerable. We're geared towards protecting ourselves. We're geared towards, we have to be the one that fights and keeps things together and fixes things. And so, this vulnerability is communication. Very important aspects of how you can be productive in a relationship. I believe that when you are with your person and it's your person and you're investing in your person, you are vulnerable. That goes to the deepest core of you. If you really believe forever after, you really believe this is your person, you are going to open up to them. And it may take some time and it may be slow, but realistically, you should be opening up to them and they should be opening up to you. You should have an understanding of that concept, that I am trusting in you. I am being vulnerable with who I am, how I feel, my emotions, and I'm communicating that to you. I realize other people communicate differently than I do, and and differently than other people do. But when we get to the meat of everything, we have to start looking at how communication exists. So when I talk about communication and how everyone says it's the key to all relationships, I argue with that point. I believe it's one of the keys. I don't believe it's the most important key, I should say, of all relationships. Reading from some perspectives that I see, I like to do a little bit of research on what other people think, some experts out there. I like to look at what their thought process is. And sometimes they're my perspective and sometimes they're not. And just like when you have a relationship or you have communication with your partner, you have to listen to their perspective. This is what I've talked about and preached in previous podcasts, but we will talk about it again. Communication is you listening to your partner's perspective, them listening to yours. And again, when you look at their perspective, are you taking anything from it? If you walk into a relationship and you say, this is my perspective, and you're not willing to open your eyes to the perspective of your partner, you're probably going to butt heads with one another. So there is some sense of, we have to be able to listen to your perspective, listen to my perspective, and come to some common ground, or take a little bit from your perspective and change my perspective. That's important. But most people will say this: communication is the foundation of healthy relationships, building trust, intimacy, and connection by allowing partners to share needs, resolve conflicts, and understand each other's perspectives through open, honest, and empathetic dialogue. Using skills like active listening, I statements, and validation to navigate challenges and foster mutual growth. It's essential for preventing misunderstandings and creating a supportive environment where both individuals feel valued, making it crucial for long-term satisfaction and happiness. Now, this is a great definition. This is exactly what it means. Communication is that concept. It is a key to it. But is communication the most important attribute of a relationship? I talked a lot about endless effort because I believe that can become some form of overall umbrella where communication falls underneath that. Endless effort means more than just communicating. And so I will say that I believe endless effort is a baseline or a foundational thing. But if you think communication is more important, then how do you communicate should be more important than just communication. We can communicate in a lot of different ways. I could tell you to F off right now, and that's communicating. I could give you the middle finger. That's sign language. I could also show you a heart sign, and I can also blow you a kiss. And I can communicate in many different ways. I can tell you all my feelings and pour my heart out to you, and I can yell and scream. That's all communicating. So I don't like to use the word communicating or communication. Use and understand that communication is not the most important thing, but understanding one another is. So there is your foundation. There's your key. We talk about endless effort first. We now talk about understanding while communicating. So I'm going to add to that definition a little bit. All right. I don't want to play semantics too much, but it is communication. We do understand it's important. But when you communicate and someone doesn't understand you, what's the point of communicating? We want to make sure we understand it's understanding one another. So communicating the right way is the most important, or is essential, is foundational. Seeking understanding should be what both partners are doing. See, what we see happen is one person's communicating, the other one is shutting down and doesn't want to understand. They're refusing to understand. They may understand what's being said, but they don't want to understand. And if you're not willing or seeking understanding, then there's no point, because you are not an active person in this communication. There is someone that is communicating and there's someone that is actively listening. Obviously, we want to make sure that it matters. We know that communication matters, but we want to make sure that both people are actively trying to seek the same goal. Here's what usually happens. When we're communicating, if you disagree with someone, and we'll get to communicating with an argument, but when you disagree with someone, you shut down communications because you don't want to hear their perspective. Now, people that are growing or emotionally intelligent, they will listen and actively look at trying to come to a solution instead of worrying about being right. That's where most relationships fall apart. And it's scary because usually there's one person fighting for the relationship and there's one person who's fighting against it. And that hurts. And it's usually the person that thinks they were wrong, or it's usually the person that was wrong and says, hey, I don't want to admit that I'm wrong. So there are different types of people out there and there's different perspectives. So why is communication and why does it matter? Well, again, it builds trust and intimacy. You want to have a safe place. You want to be able to open up and create that vulnerability. You want to be able to say that we have a deep emotional bond. And if you can create that, then you start understanding that love for your partner becomes more important than you being right or your perspective. It also resolves conflict. Healthy communication helps partners find common ground and manage disagreements constructively. Well, this conflict, and we'll get into that again, that's the biggest issue. We're not all going to agree with each other. We all have different perspectives. And when we communicate with one another, you might want something and I want the other thing. But we have to be able to understand one another. Go back to understanding. It also increases satisfaction. When you feel heard, you feel understood, you feel that they actually find some value in your perspective, it creates this happiness in your heart. It creates this concept of you feeling like your partner cares. It promotes growth. Sharing feelings and needs allows couples to evolve together and support individual growth. So relationships expand. Really important to understand why communication matters. We see it all the time. How many people have one partner doesn't communicate at all, and one partner over communicates? I feel like that's me, an over communicator. I think that's something where I've looked in the mirror recently and I've had this conversation about how do you grow as a person. And so I'm actively working on looking in the mirror at my own self and what are my faults when it comes to things that I argue over. Where could I go differently? What can I do better about myself? I'm actively working on myself, and I'm proud of myself because it's very hard to look in the mirror and be really vulnerable and honest with yourself. So when I do that, one thing I can see is, well, maybe I am an over communicator. And usually that's just a fight in me to try to fix things. I've realized I can't fix everything, and you definitely can't fix things that don't want to be fixed or people that don't want to be fixed. So as you go through life, you want to give effort, you want to give that endless effort, but you also want to be understanding of what's going on in their brain just as much as what's going on in yours. So it's an understanding again. So the keys to communicating, this communication skills that you want to create are you have to be an active listener. You have to listen to understand, not just listen. That's exactly what we're just talking about. You have to actively be part of this conversation to look for a resolution. You're actively there to try to understand your partner. You're not there to get angry about everything that's said, because most of the time when we're communicating through an argument, we're communicating in a sense in which we're blaming our partner because of how we feel. Well, that means that you have to have some tough skin a little bit. You have to actively listen to what they're hurting from and understand if you are part of that mistake or part of that reason that they're hurting. So, an active listener. The I statements. Well, express your feelings without blaming. I hurt when. Well, it's very hard to not express your feelings without blaming someone else. See, this is what I wanted to get into later, but I'll talk about it now a little bit, is this idea of understanding that when you're in a relationship and you're telling your feelings, your partner, if you know your partner is going to be hurt when you're blaming them, because anybody is hurt when someone gets blamed. You're doing this wrong, or you're doing that, and this is making me feel this way. You have to start looking at that concept of, remember, this is my partner. This is the person I love. This is the one that I'm trying to communicate to come to a resolution, not just to blame. And now we have to start this concept of saying, well, I hurt when, but also we should be, this is the key. And I think this is so important. Mark this down, write this down, whatever the case is. Every time that you're in an argument, when you're expressing your feelings on how you're hurting because of your partner's actions or because of something, please identify or acknowledge the idea of what they're feeling. What are your feelings for what they feel? That's a hard concept to understand here. I feel upset that you feel this way about me, or I feel upset, or I'm hurt because you're hurting. What's the number one thing that we can go back to? I put my partner first. I put my partner's feelings before my feelings. My feelings matter. I should be able to express my feelings. I should be able to communicate. But my partner's feelings, if they're hurt, I feel hurt. We become one. We're together. You're my person for life. So guess what? I'm going to hurt when you hurt. And as a man, I want to fix things. I want to fix that hurt. So how do I do that? Do I swallow my pride a little bit? Sometimes we try to come to a resolution through understanding, through communication. How can we create the situation where I want to look back at it and say to myself, hey, I value that you told your feelings or that you hurt, and that I'm recognizing it, that I hurt the same way. But I also want to make sure you understand how I'm feeling. Do you feel that way towards me? It's a really important concept here. But then there's empathy and validation. Acknowledge and respect your partner's feelings. Like we just said, you respect your partner's feelings. Instead of getting angry, you're respecting it. How you respond to that is going to tell you if you respect it or not. Honesty and openness. You share your thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. That's a hard one, because I feel like I've heard that, like, hey, you're judging me, or I'm fearful to tell you because you're going to get angry. Yeah, we do get angry. We do have emotions, but I have to work on, and just like many people will work on, is how do you control your emotions? How do you react differently? And I'm working on it. I'm getting better at it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that could do really well in relationships if they can control their emotions first and then respond after digesting and thinking calmly. Very difficult. And then compromise. We need to work together towards solutions that meet both partners' needs. Those are some important skills that you must have. So here are a couple of things. Here are a couple of tips to help with communication. We can schedule check-ins with each other, check in about how you're feeling. We have a regular time every week to check in with our relationship. Where are you at? How you feel? Am I doing my job? What can I do better? Ask your partner, and then listen to your partner. Because if your partner is telling you, I need this, you are the person that provides it, because they're your partner. When they say it to you, then understand that same concept. We have to be able to put our partners first. You need to take breaks. I've learned this many times. Take a small break from the discussion before it gets too heated. I have learned, even in conversations when they got heated and we're not on the same page, and and the phone disconnects somehow. Not someone hanging up. We have had that before, but like not someone hanging up, but the phone disconnects, or someone walks in and you have to stop the conversation. Even that small break of a minute, that can change the whole tone and the whole concept of you taking a deep breath and thinking before you explode with your reaction. But a lot of times, hey, I need to take a break. Can I come back in 15 minutes? Can I come back in an hour? I don't believe in taking breaks for hours and hours. I don't believe in taking breaks overnight. And I don't believe in taking breaks for days upon days, even months. That to me is disrespectful. That's a way in which your partner that takes a break that long is what they're doing is they're using silence to punish you. I 100% believe that, and I believe that exists in a lot. I know that they have a hard time, and sometimes some people have a hard time with controlling their emotions, and they need to take a minute or take a while to calm down. But you can't tell me many people can't calm down within an hour or 2 hours and say, hey, listen, I'm still upset, I'm angry, but I can approach this conversation differently. Then you also, another tip is to be respectful, avoid criticism, the name calling. When it gets to that point, it becomes disrespect. And it's openly known as disrespect. We all know that name calling is disrespectful. Some people hide disrespect. I believe disrespect can be in many forms. I believe talking over someone is disrespect. I believe the idea of cutting someone off or not letting them speak or going silent, that's all disrespect. And see, men have a hard time with disrespect. Women have a hard time with not listening or not putting their feelings first or not listening to their feelings. That's understandable. Both of you have to understand respect because both are a form of respect. That's an important part. And then show appreciation, regularly express gratitude, even in the middle of an argument. I love you. I love you this much that this makes me feel, or I want to do this, or whatever the case is. Give a compliment. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for in this argument saying this, or doing that, or not doing this. And then create safety. Ensure both partners feel safe to be vulnerable. That's a hard one to do because some people, you can't control what other people feel, but how do your actions create them to be safe? That's something I'm working on as well. Well, those are some suggestions, some improvement. I want to talk a little bit about one thing that I think works in relationships, and this is dearly to me, and it's dearly to me because I think this is a really big, important part of staying married and being able to get through marriages and not becoming roommates. Here's an important concept. Everybody talks about the 777 rule. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. I believe in a variation of this, but I also believe that this is a good concept. And so I'm going to share it with you. 777 rule is for couples in a relationship, and it's a guideline for time, quality time for you to invest in one another. It's plan a dedicated date night every 7 days. Every 7 days, you should have a date night for your partner, whether you're at home and you're watching a movie, whether you go out somewhere, whatever the case is, you're planning a date night. Hey, this is you and I. This is our time together for these 3 hours. Cool. No kids. It's us. And then you plan an overnight getaway every 7 weeks. That's almost every 2 months. You're going to have some overnight, one night somewhere, if not 2 nights. You're going somewhere, you're doing something, you're experiencing yourselves together. I don't care if you have to go down the street to the hotel, you get away from the house, you do something. Find a way to experience one another in a different location. It's important that you experience it outside of your house because now it acts as if you guys are on some sort of trip. You're on some sort of experience together. It's not just the routine at your house. You don't have all those other things that you got to take care of sitting right in front of you. You are on vacation, if you will, once every 7 weeks, one day. And then a longer kid-free vacation every 7 months. So basically, once a year, you're going to go somewhere with your person. And you're going to make sure that that exists. You have to plan for that, which adds to your communication and your entire relationship. Communicate with one another. Where do I want to go? What do we want to do? What do we want to experience together? You're creating an intimacy together just by planning. The excitement sits there. There's the macro thinking that we're talking about. What are our goals? What are we going to get to? How do we save this money for it? All three of these 777s, they all are aimed at consistent, intentional connection to prevent drifting apart. It's a structural way to prioritize quality time, intimacy, and shared experiences. Every marriage needs this. Every one of my friends that I've talked to that is married, I said, date your wife. Go on a date every week. Have date night every single week. Get away. I envy my sister for getting away with her husband every couple months. They always find somewhere to go, something to do. Go to a casino, spend the night. I mean, they did it right and they continue to do it. I love that. And then they go on trips. And just like me, I love going on trips. I wanted trips. I want those things in my life. I love vacations. I love traveling. Those are things. We should all have that with our person. So just remember the 777 rule. Put that in your life. If you have your person, it creates this intimacy, it creates this quality time and these shared experiences that will keep you loving one another. The communication will be there as you discuss this and go through this, and it's something to look forward to. All right. Just remember, and that's the last thing I want to talk about is when all relationships are good, when all things are great, when you guys are spending time together, when you're on the same page and there's no arguments, man, life is great. Everyone loves each other. Everybody's great. Communication is great. We talk, yeah, whatever you need, we're back and forth. Everything's great. But what happens when there's turmoil? What happens when things are not so great? You have hardship, you have arguments. What happens when you're not on the same page? Communication, when you are in the turmoil, is the most important. The understanding of the communication is the most important. Think about that idea. We all can shut down when we are upset and angry at each other. We shut down and we hide. You are walking away from staying in the fight with your person. This is your person. You go to death do us part. You are there. What I want you to understand is when you go silent, you walk away from that. What ultimately happens to you is that one person's fighting, the other one's not. So communication during an argument involves so much more depth of understanding your approach, your tone, your understanding of your partner's feelings, and how they respond to you. It's showing up, right? It's not hiding. It's having difficult conversations and intentionally seeking a common solution or understanding, not just winning an argument. The thought of remembering you love this person, show them compassion, show them love, and be softer towards them. Remember the goal. It's a resolution between both of your perspectives. Get back to the good, the happy, and be at peace. So when the times are rough, if you don't realize that understanding one another, and part of understanding one another is that both of you are actively, intentionally trying to understand where your partner is coming from and looking for a solution. And I'm going to tell you the biggest misconception is this. Most people are sitting on the other end of that communication and they are MFing you. They give up, they quit. They don't want to listen to your perspective because they've already made up their mind about theirs. They're angry because you did something. Instead of listening to the why. Why did this happen? We have to take a step outside of our own self and look in the mirror. Yes, that person was wrong for whatever happened. Yes, we understand that. But what did we do? What were we in this situation? What act did we play in this situation? I truly think that people looked at that bigger picture and said, hey, okay, is this really worth it? Is this the fight I want? Am I on this wall? Someone told me this once during their fighting, and they said, we used to say, is this something you're going to stay on the wall? You're going to stand on that wall. And they mean like referring to like the old war terms, like, are you going to stand your ground on that wall? Are you going to stand your ground on that hill for this little argument, for this issue? Or are you going to let down and let your partner have that if it's that important to them? There is a compromise. There is a give and take in every single thing you do. And that compromise is not easy when you think you're right. It's not easy when you think that you need this. But what's worse? Losing your partner? What's worse than that? Giving up all the things that you put your effort and your time and your attention towards? Like last week we talked about endless effort. You put in all of this for some stupid argument? For some misconception because somebody made a mistake. And that's one thing when you make a mistake. It's another thing when you make repeated mistakes over and over and over again, and you are a partner that is not involved in trying to find a resolution. You give up, you go hide, you quit. Or there's only one person putting the effort in. That's different. I've recently learned this concept of dismissive avoidance. Some people have that. There's traumas in their life that they went through. Does it give them an excuse? Nope. Is it something that they need to identify and work on? Absolutely. They need to become better partners. Just like you need to become a better partner by understanding where they're coming from. I don't have all the answers, and I'm not perfect. I do believe I have an intelligence when it comes to relationships, and that there are things that we can bring to the table to understand. Most men are deemed in one way, and it's rightfully so. There's probably a lot of men out there that don't think twice about relationships and, emotional intellect and conversations about how these things affect both of you for your future. Most relationships don't have two people that are equally intellect in the relationship. There's usually one person that's leading the way and another person that's following, or one person's giving that person everything they need and they're taking it, or vice versa, or there's an argument. I truly hope everybody finds somebody in their life that they're compatible with, where they both have a fight towards a resolution, towards this idea of saying, hey, you know what? I love the idea that we can communicate effectively, where we both understand one another and we're on the same page, because we don't want to ruin this relationship. I think the number one foundational part of relationships is endless effort. I think the number two foundational component of relationships is understanding during communication. Not just communicating, but understanding your partner. Put your partner's feelings first, before your own, most of the time, when you're making decisions or communicating with them. It is the key to a healthy relationship. And I think if you do that, then you will find a way in which you understand that it's more important to have your partner by your side and work with your partner than it is to argue and fight over something that you disagree on. I will leave you with this. I read this quote and I thought this was really important. So when you're having these conversations and you're communicating with one another, whether it's through text or memes or sign language or talking, or usually I would say, I think the best way to communicate is face to face. We all do text, we all do phone calls, we all do different things that way. Face to face. Have a conversation where you're in the same energy as that person, because they can see your expressions. And then be mindful of your expressions. Be intentional about trying to get to a resolution. So if you're mindful of it and you're face to face, you remember you love that person. You love their face, you love their features, you love how they react, you love all the things. Even when they're angry, you still love the parts of who that person is. It helps remind that. When you're on the phone, it's a disconnect. When you're text messaging, you can't see emotion. So the idea is be face to face. But what I say to you is this quote that I'm leaving you with. Mastering communication is about understanding the unsaid as much as the said. Some people are not so great with their words. You already know the unsaid because you know your person. You know by looking at them, seeing their reactions, you know the unsaid because you know yourself and you know your part in this entire argument. So when we talk about communication, you need to understand the unsaid as much as what they say. And the one last thing I'll say to you is this: don't use semantics. Well, you said it this way. Well, they misspoke for a minute. You know what they meant. That's the unsaid. You also know that if they misspeak or they try to correct themselves, you can't use that against them. That's called building up, ammunition towards them. Don't do that. That means you're trying to win a fight. This is not a fight between you two. This is a fight together to find a resolution. This is a fight together to get back to your peace. I hope every one of you finds peace in your relationships. I hope this helps anybody out there have a different perspective, or look at it and say, you know what, maybe I need to start looking at myself in that mirror, or maybe I need to communicate for understanding and check and look for understanding while my partner's speaking. I truly believe in this. I believe that wherever I end up in life, one thing's going to happen. I'm going to give that to that person. I work on it constantly. I'm not perfect. And these are constantly things you work on throughout relationships that you go through. So those are things that will exist in my life just because I believe in everything that I preach. I'm not perfect. I know I've gone against some things I've said. I know there's certain things out there, but I'm pretty much somebody that says what he believes and does what he believes. That's called integrity. And I like to understand that I have integrity when it comes to what I'm preaching. So I will go back. I will continue on with this relationship series. We'll get into man versus woman and our ways of thinking. We'll get into a lot of different things. So stay tuned. Please like this, share it, follow it, whatever the case is. Even if you're on Amazon, if you're on Apple, if you're on Spotify, if you're on iHeartRadio, please go and do it. I appreciate you guys so much. Signing off. See you soon.